Hey, amazing viewers. Before we go into this riveting narrative, drop your location in the comments below. We love connecting with you all around the world. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. Let's hit 10,000 subscribers this month together. Your support means everything. The final days before the storm. Melanie stood in the middle of the nursery, one hand resting gently on the curve of her belly, the other smoothing out a tiny pink undies she had just folded. The scent of lavender from the freshly washed baby clothes filled the air, mingling with the faint vanilla candle burning on the windowsill. Sunlight streamed through the soft, peach-colored curtains, casting a golden glow on the delicate decorations she and her husband, Joel, had painstakingly picked out for their daughter's arrival. The room was a labor of love, a sanctuary waiting for a baby girl who would complete their family. Gabriella. They had whispered her name to each other for months, imagining the giggles, the tiny hands grasping at their fingers, the warmth of her little body nestled against them. Now, with only a week left until their due date, everything was in place. Melanie let out a small sigh and sat down in the plush rocking chair by the crib, rubbing her belly in slow, soothing circles. "You ready to meet us, little one?" she murmured, feeling a soft, fluttering kick in response. Talking to her again. Joel's voice made her smile. She turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, his blue eyes twinkling with amusement. His dark hair was tousled, his sleeves rolled up, revealing the strong forearms she had traced with her fingers countless times before. "She's got a lot to say," Melanie teased. "I think she's just as impatient as we are." Joel crossed the room in a few strides and knelt beside her, resting his cheek against her belly. "Hey, baby girl," he whispered, "your big debut is coming up. You think you can be easy on your mom and not take forever?" Another small kick. "She's got your attitude already," Melanie laughed. "Stubborn." Joel pressed a kiss to Melanie's belly before looking up at her. "You're amazing, you know that. Carrying her, taking care of everything. I don't know how you do it." She smiled, brushing her fingers through his hair. "We're a team, remember? And soon, we're going to be a team of 4. A sudden blur of movement shot past them. "Can I come in now?" Their 6-year-old son, Brady, stood at the door, his blonde curls bouncing as he shifted from foot to foot. His green eyes, the same shade as Melanie's, were wide with excitement. "Of course, sweetheart," Melanie said, holding out a hand. Brady ran inside and immediately climbed onto Joel's lap. His little fingers traced the patterns on Melanie's dress before settling gently on her belly. "Is Gabriella really in there?" he asked, his voice filled with childlike wonder. "She sure is," Joel confirmed. Brady grinned. "I can't wait to show her my dinosaur collection, but I get to hold her first, right?" Melanie chuckled. "We'll have to see about that." Joel ruffled Brady's hair. "She's going to be lucky to have a big brother like you." Brady puffed out his chest. "I'll protect her from everything, even monsters." Melanie felt warmth flood her chest. Their family was perfect, and soon, it would be even more so. The unexpected fatigue. As the days inched closer to Gabriella's arrival, Melanie noticed a shift in her body. She had been tired before. Every expectant mother was. But this was different. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was as if the life was being drained out of her little by little. Simple tasks left her winded. Walking up the stairs felt like running a marathon. Her fingers swelled more than usual. Her legs felt heavier. "You should rest more," Joel had said one night as he tucked Brady into bed. "I don't like how tired you've been lately." "I'm fine," Melanie reassured him, though deep down, she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. It's normal this late in the pregnancy. Joel didn't look convinced. He reached out, his fingers grazing her wrist. "Promise me, if anything feels off, you'll tell me." She hesitated but then nodded. "I promise." But the next morning, as she got out of bed, a wave of dizziness hit her so hard that she had to grip the nightstand to keep from falling. For a brief moment, her vision darkened. It passed just as quickly as it came, leaving her breathless. She didn't tell Joel. The morning that changed everything. Melanie woke up before sunrise. She knew something was different the moment her eyes fluttered open. A dull, rhythmic pressure gripped her abdomen. Not painful, just steady. The telltale sign. She turned her head toward Joel, who was still asleep, his arm draped protectively over her waist. She nudged him gently. "Joel," she whispered, "I think it's time." His eyes shot open. "Now." She nodded, a small, excited smile on her lips. "Yeah, we should go." Within the hour, they were in the car, Brady safely with Melanie's mother. The roads were quiet in the early morning light, the sky painted in hues of lavender and gold. Melanie's contractions were still mild, and despite the discomfort, there was an air of excitement between them. "You ready to meet your daughter?" she asked, squeezing Joel's hand. Joel glanced at her with a grin. "I've been ready since the moment we found out about her." At the hospital, Melanie was quickly admitted. The nurses fussed over her, checking her vitals, monitoring the baby's heartbeat. Everything seemed normal. As the hours passed, the contractions intensified, but something else was happening too. Melanie felt weak, not from the labor itself, but something deeper, something she couldn't quite place. Joel noticed. "Are you okay?" he asked, squeezing her hand. She forced a smile. "Just tired." But then, a strange sensation crept up her chest. A heaviness, a pressure. It made it hard to breathe. A nurse noticed her expression and frowned. "How are you feeling, Melanie?" Melanie hesitated. "A little dizzy. And my chest feels tight." The nurse's face darkened slightly, her movements suddenly sharper as she checked Melanie's blood pressure. A moment later, she glanced at another nurse and nodded toward the door. "I'm getting the doctor," she said quickly. Joel stiffened beside Melanie. "What's wrong?" "I don't know," Melanie whispered, more to herself than to him. A sharp pain shot through her chest. Then, in an instant, her vision blurred. Something was very, very wrong. She gasped, her body tensing. "Joel." And then, the world faded. The last thing she heard was the sound of alarms blaring. The last thing she felt was the warmth of Joel's hand slipping away as darkness swallowed her whole. A race against time. Joel never truly understood what it meant to feel helpless, until now. One moment, he was holding Melanie's hand, watching her fight through the contractions with that quiet strength he had always admired. The next, her body stiffened, her lips parted in a silent gasp, and then nothing. Her fingers slipped from his grasp as her head lolled back against the pillows. "Melanie?" Her eyes were open, but there was no recognition in them. No response. The warmth in them had vanished, replaced by something terrifyingly empty. Then the alarms began. The shrill beeping of the heart monitor sent a surge of panic through him. Nurses rushed in. Hands moved swiftly, checking her vitals, feeling for a pulse. The air thickened with urgency. "She's crashing," one of them shouted. A doctor sprinted into the room, his face grave. "Code blue. Get the crash cart in here now." Joel's breath hitched. His world tilted. "Code blue." The words slammed into his chest like a wrecking ball. He wasn't a doctor, but he knew enough to understand what that meant. His wife, his Melanie, was dying. No. What's happening?" Joel demanded, but no one had time to answer him. A nurse grabbed his arm and pulled him back, her grip surprisingly firm. "Sir, we need space. Let us work." "Work on what?" She was fine. She was just fine. But was she? The memory of her exhaustion, her dizziness, the tightness in her chest, things she had brushed off, came rushing back. How did we miss this? Tears blurred his vision as he stood frozen in place, watching the medical team fight for her life. A nurse pressed an oxygen mask over Melanie's face. Another injected something into her IV. The doctor barked out orders, his voice sharp with urgency. Her BP is dropping, severe hypoxia setting in. She's not breathing on her own. Intubate her now. Joel gripped the edge of a nearby chair, his knuckles turning white. This isn't real. This can't be real. And then, just when he thought things couldn't get worse, someone uttered words that made his blood run cold. We're losing the baby's heartbeat. The impossible choice. Joel felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. Save Melanie. Save the baby. What kind of cruel nightmare was this? He staggered forward. No. No. You have to save them both. Do whatever you have to do. Just bring them back. The obstetrician turned to him, her face drawn with sorrow. Mr. Carter, we're doing everything we can. But right now, we need to get the baby out immediately. If we wait any longer, we could lose them both. The words sliced through him like a blade. This wasn't supposed to happen. They were supposed to welcome their daughter into the world together. Melanie was supposed to hold Gabriella first, whisper to her, kiss her forehead. Not this. Not like this. Prep for an emergency C-section, the doctor ordered. Joel's knees nearly buckled. He barely registered the flurry of movement around him. The way the nurses worked with terrifying efficiency, wheeling Melanie's motionless body out of the room. The whispers in the hallway. The flickering hospital lights overhead. Someone guided him toward a chair. He collapsed into it, his hands gripping his face. He was about to become a father again. But at what cost? The battle inside the operating room. Inside the operating room, the tension was suffocating. Melanie's body lay limp on the table, machines beeping in erratic rhythms. The doctors worked swiftly, making an incision with expert precision. Blood pooled. The sterile room smelled of antiseptics, of desperation. The baby's heart rate is still dropping. She's in full respiratory failure. Get those compressions going. A nurse wiped sweat from the surgeon's brow. We have 30 seconds before we lose both of them. The scalpel moved. The incision widened. Hands reached inside. For a split second, there was silence. Then, a cry. A small, piercing wail cut through the chaos. We have a girl. The room exhaled. The doctor held up the newborn, her tiny body wriggling, her face red and scrunched as she protested the world she had just entered. But the celebration was short-lived. She's not breathing well. Her oxygen levels are dangerously low. The neonatal team rushed in, whisking Gabriella away to an incubator, attaching tiny tubes and monitors to her fragile body. But as they worked on the baby, another emergency was unfolding. Her BP is plummeting. Her heart, it's stopping. The lead surgeon clenched his jaw. She's going into cardiac arrest. STARTCOMPRESSIOS, and now. Chest compressions began. Rhythmic. Desperate. A nurse squeezed Joel's hand when she came out into the hallway. Your daughter is alive. Joel barely heard her. And Melanie. She hesitated. She's still fighting. But he could read between the lines. She might not make it. A desperate plea. Joel pressed his forehead against the cold hospital wall. His entire body trembled. God, he whispered, his voice raw. If you're listening, if you've ever listened to me before, please, don't take her away from me. His mind flooded with memories. Melanie's laughter on their wedding day. The way she danced in the kitchen with Brady on her hip. The nights they spent dreaming about their future. Please, let her come back. A doctor emerged from the operating room, his face unreadable. Joel stood up so fast, he nearly knocked over a chair. Tell me she's okay. Please. The doctor took a breath. She has a pulse, but she's not waking up. The edge of forever. Joel had never known silence to be so deafening. Hospitals were always full of sounds. Beeping machines, hurried footsteps, muffled conversations behind closed doors. But in the waiting room outside the ICU, the world had gone disturbingly still. Joel sat with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly together, as if praying, though he wasn't sure if he was. Maybe he was just holding on to something, anything, to keep from falling apart. Gabriella was alive. That was the first miracle. But Melanie, she was still in that operating room, still teetering on the thin line between life and death. She has a pulse. Those had been the doctor's words. Not, she's okay. Not, she's going to be fine. Just that she had a pulse. A weak, flickering thing, barely clinging to existence. Joel squeezed his eyes shut, images of the past few hours flashing like lightning behind his eyelids. Melanie's body, limp on that hospital bed, her fingers slipping from his. The alarms, the panic. His wife was the strongest person he knew, but right now, she was fighting a battle he couldn't help her with, and it was killing him. A father's first moment with his daughter. Mr. Carter. Joel jerked his head up. A nurse stood in front of him, her face soft with something that looked like kindness, pity, maybe. She was holding a small, swaddled bundle. Gabriella. She's stable, the nurse said. Would you like to hold her? Joel hesitated. His heart screamed yes, but his hands were shaking. What if he dropped her? What if he held her and broke completely? What if? Here, the nurse whispered, easing Gabriella into his arms. And suddenly, none of the what-ifs mattered. The moment he felt the weight of her, warm and impossibly small against his chest, something inside him shattered. She was beautiful. Her tiny face was scrunched, her eyelids fluttering as if she were still trying to figure out if she liked this new world she had entered. A little button nose, soft tufts of dark hair, her tiny fingers curled into fists against the blanket. Joel traced a trembling finger along her cheek. "Hey, baby girl," he whispered. His voice cracked, but he didn't care. She stirred, letting out a small sigh. Joel felt something tighten in his chest, something that was both love and pain, joy and sorrow, all tangled together in a knot so deep he wasn't sure he'd ever unravel it. "You're here," he murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "You made it." But her mother wasn't here to see her, and that realization nearly crushed him. The weight that felt like forever. Hours passed. Joel didn't move from the chair in the NICU. He kept Gabriella close, feeling the slow, steady rise and fall of her tiny chest. Nurses came and went, checking her vitals, whispering updates he barely processed. His mother-in-law had arrived at some point, tears in her eyes, holding Brady in her arms. Brady. Joel's heart clenched at the sight of his son's wide, confused eyes. "Where's Mommy?" Joel swallowed hard, shifting Gabriella slightly so he could pull Brady onto his lap. "She's..." His throat tightened. He had no idea how to explain this to a 6-year-old. "Mommy got really sick when Gabriella was born. The doctors are helping her, but she needs to rest right now." Brady frowned. "Will she wake up soon?" God, how was he supposed to answer that? Joel forced a smile. "I hope so, bud. I really do." Brady pressed his face against Joel's shoulder. "I want her to come home." "Me too," Joel whispered, holding both his children close. But as the night stretched on, as the hours bowled into one another with no updates, no changes, no miracles, hope started to feel like a cruel joke. A miracle in the darkness. At some point, exhaustion won. Joel must have dozed off because the next thing he knew, someone was shaking his shoulder gently. His heart jumped into his throat before he even opened his eyes. A doctor stood in front of him. He was still in his scrubs, looking exhausted but calm. Joel shot to his feet so fast that Brady, who had fallen asleep in his lap, stirred. "What?" His voice cracked. "What's happening? Is she?" "She's alive," the doctor said immediately, and Joel nearly collapsed from the sheer force of relief. "She's stable now. We were able to restart her heart and manage the embolism." "But," the doctor hesitated, and Joel's stomach clenched. "But what?" "She hasn't woken up yet." Joel felt like someone had punched him in the gut. But she will, right? His voice was hoarse, desperate. The doctor sighed. We're hopeful. But her body went through a lot. Right now, it's up to her. Up to her. Joel's hands clenched into fists. Then fight. Mel, please, fight. Can I see her? The doctor nodded. A love that wouldn't let go. The sight of Melanie nearly broke him all over again. She looked so small in the hospital bed, tubes and wires attached to her, a ventilator helping her breathe. The monitors beeped steadily, a constant reminder that her heart was still beating. But she wasn't there. Not really. Joel sank into the chair beside her bed, gripping her hand in both of his. Her fingers were cold. He lifted them to his lips, pressing soft kisses against her knuckles. Mel, it's me. Nothing. I'm right here, baby. And so is Gabriella. She's beautiful. Mel, she looks just like you. His voice wavered. She's strong, just like her mama. His throat closed up. You don't have to be scared. I've got you. I've always got you. Silence. A single tear slid down his cheek. Just come back, okay? Please, I can't do this without you. His fingers tightened around hers, willing some of his warmth, some of his strength, into her. And then, a twitch. It was barely anything, a faint movement, the slightest flutter of her fingers against his palm. But to Joel, it felt like the entire world had just shifted. Mel, his breath caught. Another twitch. Then, the faintest pressure. Joel shot to his feet. She squeezed my hand, he gasped. His heart pounded against his ribs. She's coming back. The monitors beeped faster. The doctor rushed in, and suddenly, there was hope again. Joel held onto her hand for dear life. That's it, baby, he whispered. Come back to me. A love that refused to let go. The world had stopped moving the moment Melanie collapsed in that delivery room. And now, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Joel felt the earth shift again. It was subtle, so small that if he hadn't been watching her hand so closely, he might have missed it. But he felt it. Her fingers. They twitched. Then, slowly, deliberately, she squeezed his hand. A gasp tore from Joel's throat. Mel. His voice cracked as he stumbled forward, his grip tightening around hers. His heart thundered against his ribs, a desperate, chaotic rhythm of hope and fear clashing inside of him. Nurses rushed in. Machines beeped faster. The doctor was suddenly at Melanie's bedside, shining a light into her half-closed eyes, murmuring things Joel barely registered. All he could focus on was her hand. It was still in his, and she was holding on. The battle to wake up. Melanie was trapped in the dark. She wasn't sure where she was, or how long she had been here, but the blackness stretched endlessly around her. Somewhere, far away, she could hear voices, muffled, distant, like echoes in an empty cavern. Mel, can you hear me? She tried to move, to speak, but it was like her body didn't belong to her anymore. Panic clawed at her chest. She was floating. No, she was sinking. The weight of exhaustion pulled her deeper into the abyss. She wanted to fight it, but she was so tired. Just let go. The thought whispered through her mind like a cruel temptation. But then, a warmth, a pressure around her fingers. Something solid, something real. She focused on it, clung to it like a lifeline. It was familiar. It was him. Joel. Breathing again. Her eyelids fluttered. Joel sucked in a breath so sharp it burned his lungs. Mel. He leaned forward, his hands cradling hers like they were the most precious thing in the world. A tremor ran through her fingers. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The doctor leaned over her, checking her vitals. Melanie, if you can hear me, I want you to try to open your eyes. A long pause. Then, slowly, painstakingly, her lashes lifted. It wasn't much, just a flicker of hazel beneath heavy lids. But to Joel, it was everything. Hey, he choked out, brushing his knuckles against her cheek. You're back. Her eyes barely stayed open for more than a second before sliding shut again. But this time, it wasn't the still, terrifying unconsciousness of before. It was just sleep. Healing. Joel let out a shaky breath, pressing his forehead against her hand. Thank you, he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to her, to God, or to whatever force had given him his wife back. She was weak, she was fragile, but she was alive. And that was enough. For now, the first time she saw her daughter. The next few days were a blur of slow recovery. Melanie was awake, but exhausted. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her body struggling to regain strength after what it had endured. Joel stayed by her side. He barely slept, barely ate. Every time she opened her eyes, he was there, whispering reassurances, brushing her hair away from her damp forehead, telling her how much he loved her. But there was one moment he had been waiting for. One moment that mattered more than anything. Mel, he murmured one afternoon, his voice thick with emotion. There's someone who's been waiting to meet you. She turned her head toward him slowly, her brow furrowing. Who? Joel smiled. Then, carefully, he stood and stepped out of the room for a moment. When he returned, he was holding the tiniest, most precious bundle in his arms. Melanie's breath hitched. Joel gently lowered himself into the chair beside her bed, positioning Gabriella against Melanie's chest. For a second, Melanie just stared. And then, the tears came. Oh my God, she whispered, her voice breaking. Gabriella was small, smaller than she should have been. But she was warm and real and alive. She's perfect, Melanie choked out, her fingers trembling as she traced them over the baby's delicate features. Joel swallowed past the lump in his throat. Just like her mom. Melanie let out a watery laugh. I was so scared I'd never get to see her. But you did, Joel whispered, resting his forehead against hers. You came back to us. Gabriella stirred against Melanie's chest, letting out a soft sigh. Melanie sobbed, holding her closer. I love you so much, she whispered to her daughter. And I'm never letting go. Joel kissed the top of Melanie's head, his own tears slipping down his cheeks. They had been to hell and back, but they had made it. Together, a new beginning. The house felt different when they returned. Not because the furniture had changed, or the walls had lost their color, but because life, real, tangible, miraculous life, was breathing inside it. Melanie clutched Gabriella close to her chest as Joel guided her through the front door, his hand gentle on the small of her back, as if he feared she might disappear if he let go. Welcome home, baby girl, Melanie whispered against her daughter's tiny head, inhaling the soft, sweet scent of newborn skin. Gabriella didn't stir. She was warm and content in her mother's arms, blissfully unaware of the battles that had been fought just to bring her into the world. Joel exhaled a shaky breath and looked around, as if seeing their home through new eyes. Everything was the same, but nothing was the same. Brady came barreling down the stairs the moment he heard them, his small feet pounding against the floor. Mommy. Melanie barely had time to brace herself before her son threw his arms around her waist, burying his face against her. For the first time since she had woken up in that hospital bed, the weight of it all hit her. She could have missed this. She could have been just a memory, a name whispered at bedtime, a face in old photographs. But she wasn't. She was here. She dropped to her knees, careful not to jostle Gabriella, and pulled Brady in close, pressing a kiss into his golden curls. I'm right here, baby, she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. Mommy's home. Brady sniffled. I was scared. Melanie closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against his. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. Joel crouched beside them, wrapping his arms around them both, as if anchoring them to this moment, to this life they had been given a second chance at. No words were needed. They simply held on to each other, hearts beating in the same rhythm, bound together by love and loss, by fear and faith, by the understanding that nothing would ever be taken for granted again. A love that transcended the darkness. That night, as the house settled into quiet, Joel found himself awake. Not out of worry, but because he couldn't stop looking at her. Melanie lay beside him, her breathing slow and even. Gabriella nestled against her chest. She looked so peaceful. For weeks, he had lived with the gut-wrenching fear that he would never see her like this again, that their bed would be too cold, too empty, that Brady would grow up without his mother, that Gabriella would never know the sound of her voice, the warmth of her embrace. But here she was, alive, breathing, laughing, loving. Joel reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. He had nearly lost the love of his life, but somehow, the universe had chosen to give her back to him, and he would never take that for granted. Melanie stirred slightly, her lips curving into a sleepy smile. "You're staring at me," she mumbled. Joel huffed a quiet laugh. "I can't help it. You almost left me, you know." She opened her eyes, something deep and knowing in them. "I heard you." His breath hitched. "When?" he whispered. "In the hospital." Her fingers curled around his. "When I was in the dark. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. But I heard you. I felt you." Joel swallowed past the lump in his throat. "I beg you to come back." She squeezed his hand, and I did. Tears burned in his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. Instead, he leaned in, pressing a lingering kiss to her forehead. "I'm never letting you go again," he whispered. Melanie smiled, shifting closer, pressing Gabriella between them. "You never did," she murmured. And in that moment, Joel knew. Love had saved her. Love had brought her back. And love would carry them through everything that was to come. Together. Forever. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.